Sam, that barely works for sex ed. It barely works for condom education.
Well,
yes, it doesn't work, bro. Sorry. Like, hey, Peterson's 100% right. This is what...
the way this looks to me. So if we can agree that this makes sense actually as a fitness enhancing adaptation, that this story would result in people behaving in a way that might result in them marrying early, might result in them reproducing earlier than they would otherwise, right? Then we can understand it as mechanistic, and we can understand what you said, that, maybe God would care about whether or not people masturbate because God is a metaphor for some set of stories that gets you to behave in an adaptive fashion. But the point for you then would be that Sam is arguing with reason we can decide whether or not to employ this story at this moment, whether it's a good idea for us to urgently reproduce as quickly as possible, which, for example...
We've been trying, I like this idea in concept, but recent history has demonstrated otherwise, because it is absolutely a good idea for people to be having more kids in this moment, because we are below replacement rates, and our people are, immature, man children a lot of the time, or woman children. Basically, we're not responsible enough. We don't take our obligations seriously enough, in my mind. And the evidence of that, in terms of the childbearing front, is that we are way low on, we are under replacement rates, and we have been for a little while now. So, you can say that we'll use rationality to decide it's a good idea, but we've never been in a more rational time than we are now, at least theoretically. Again, rational is vague, but less religious time than we are now. And we have those stories at our disposal if we want to choose them, and nobody's choosing them, even though it's a good idea, even though it's theoretically a good idea, in a rationalistic way, because we're below replacement rates, and yet people aren't doing it. So maybe not so much. Maybe not so much, Sam Harris. Maybe you do need those stories to have a little bit more bite. Then you can follow them only if you feel like it, or if you personally feel like it's a good idea. People don't always make the best decisions. In fact, they make them incorrectly more often than not when left purely to their own devices and left with only very mild suggestions as opposed to more strict guidelines. And again, the evidence for that is just in the birth rates. So I don't know if I buy that. It's a nice idea that we can just kind of do it well when we're left up to our own, but it's just the current historical record. It's just been proven that that's not true so far. Maybe there's a stunning reversal coming, but I kind of doubt it.
Increases the size of the population of the planet, whereas delaying reproduction keeps the rate of population growth down, and might be a better choice for a moment in history when we have 7.5 billion people on the planet.
The Earth can handle 7.5 billion. We can handle a hell of a lot more than that. We are not. There's no over. We are not at a significant risk of overpopulating. Malthus was wrong. Paul Ehrlich was wrong. There is no population bomb. It's fine. We are not at a point where we have too little people. Having more people is actually nice because you can basically get more intelligence. You basically get more IQ in the system. You could theorize, you could say that we have an overpopulation problem. We have ideologies and political positions that say we're killing the planet through overpopulation. And while we are doing some bad things to the planet, overpopulation itself is not one of them. And our current falling birth rates is something that is going to have some bitter fruit in the long term. So that's all very, probably not true.
So in some sense, what I think I see is the religious story itself makes some kind of sense if you adhere to it in a manner that you are obligated and have no tools with which to question it. Then you will miss the fact that at this moment you might want to throw that story out.
But the problem is it doesn't make sense, and this is a problem with these heuristics in general. It doesn't make sense for the right reason, and that's why it's not a reliable guide given other changes in the world. But with everything changing, you want to be making sense for the right reason. You don't want it so useful fictions have to be retired at a certain point. Useful truths stay true. I mean, because they're based on your engagement with.
Well, he's assuming that the useful fiction isn't true. See, this is the problem. Just because something may or may not be literally true does not mean it's not true and will not be true through many changes. Again, this idea of there are certain ways to live your life that are better than other ways to live your life, and that will hold throughout cultures, across circumstances, even if the literal stories showing you that way to live your life may or may not be true. That idea is metaphorical truth. You can call it a useful fiction, but you're just putting a label on it to decategorize it as a truth, and I don't accept that premise. I think that if it's reliably true across circumstances, the archetype holds, that the pattern of behavior tends to work. If it tends to support civilizations, then I count that as true. Maybe a different type of truth besides literal truth, but calling it a useful fiction is just a semantic way of kind of decategorizing it from what I think it's better understood as.
Reality. And so to take your point about pornography, which I think is totally valid, you could have a completely rational conversation in terms of human psychology and sociology and what you want society to look like about the corrosive nature of pornography.
Yes, some people can have that conversation, but it will not inspire the same amount of social adherence on a societally scaled level as the story will, if you tell a sufficiently compelling story. This is the reality. This is the reality that has been borne out by recent history. This idea, we are called the War of Ideas channel because I like talking about these ideas, and it's important that we have access to that, and anybody can access it at the same time, at whenever they want. That's 100% the case. However, stripping away our stories and reducing all of our societal guidelines to just these conversations is too chaotic. It's not enough to keep a society's head on straight. And again, recent history has shown that we could make rational decisions about having kids based on birth rates, but we're not. We could have rational discussions about what pornography does to your psyche, and yet everybody's still addicted to pornography or doing pornography. We could, theoretically, have rational decisions about these things and then come to the right answers for good reasons, theoretically, but recent history shows that people aren't doing that. So you need the stories. The stories are important. And then if you want to understand the reasons behind the stories, if you are so inclined and so interested, as some people are, but most people aren't, then you can come and access these conversations and understand them and debate them, and that's fine. But getting rid of the stories altogether is not forceful enough guidelines to keep a society together. I like the idea theoretically. Recent history says it's not working. Sorry, I didn't decide that. I would have preferred it to be the way that Sam Harris and Brett Weinstein wanted it to be. But it's just not the results. The test results are in. It didn't work. Sorry. I suppose I may be calling it quits a little too early. It's only been like 50, 40 years, depending on where you count the start. But trends ain't looking good, folks. So unless we have some sort of revolution of rationality that's actually like a good one this time, I don't see it. It's not likely.
Right. You don't have to be a Victorian prude to worry that there might be something wrong with the infinite availability of pornography to 13-year-olds and above, right? I mean, that's I don't know.
And above, I was thinking below. Yeah, that's some dangerous stuff. Again, maybe a full video. We'll see.
What generation of human beings we're raising in the current environment? It's quite worrisome, actually. But again, you don't have to invoke mythology to do that. And I would say the temptation to invoke mythology is say, well, you actually,
So how do you do it?
Poseidon really gets pissed off when you masturbate.
How do you do it? How do you do it? We don't have a mechanism. We have no mechanism for controlling that.
Talk about the effects on human relationships and your own mind and your own intention and the way you view other people.
Sam, that barely works for sex ed. It barely works for condom education.
Well,
yes, it doesn't work, bro. Sorry. Like, Peterson's 100% right. This is what we do. We have these rational conversations in sex ed, and it doesn't work. Like, it barely works at all. You want to do this on a societal level? And you want to do it with, like, when most of them are not young and impressionable kids? That's your plan? Really? Generalize the thing that's barely working in the most controlled environment and that we possibly can, and scale it up to a much less controlled environment with much less impressionable and more obstinate people? That's the plan? Of course it doesn't work. Of course it hasn't worked. And of course it probably won't work. Peterson's 100% right about this. 100% right.
What was that?
Barely works. Like those sorts of educational interventions to stop that kind of fundamental behavior have very little effect.
Well,
people aren't nearly as amenable to behavioral changes as a consequence of rational educational interventions as you might hope.
100%, 1000%. Peterson is correct. Again, for some people are like super amenable if they're just given the evidence that they're wrong, then they'll suddenly change all of their beliefs and all of their behavior. But most people aren't like that. It's just not how it works. Peterson's right. It doesn't work. You need the stories. The reason you can have the reasons behind the stories, you can have conversations about the reasons behind the stories, but you cannot expect all of society to be able to be held within stable guidelines by basis of those rational conversations, because the evidence is in and it does not work. You have to have the stories on top of them. They're more compelling, they're more societally generalizable, they have a better historical track record of actually influencing behavior. Data's in, scoreboard, pure rational conversations for controlling societal behavior, like 3. Evidence of stories and drama influencing societal level behavior, like 3,000. Not my scoreboard, it's just how it works. But if you agree with Sam Harris on this or his other absolutely insane take at the beginning about how like marriage out of wedlock being bad is diabolical and needless, I can't even take it seriously. It's a crazy thing to say. Anyway, if you disagree with me, let me know in the comments. See you all next time.